As writers, we're always complaining that we don't have enough time to write. But I'm going to share with you today why I actually write better when I have less time to write.
You have a story to tell, but you don't know where to start. Let me show you how to free your story. I teach you how to write and how to dig deep in your soul to release your story and make a difference in the world.
Welcome to the Julia Monte channel. For just meeting, I am Julia Monte. I'm a women's fiction author and also here to share some writing tips with you if you are a writer. So let's talk about time. Okay, so that is the big problem. It's probably one of the biggest problems that writers have because most of us are not full-time writers, meaning that we don't get to just sit home and write our novels from morning till night or whenever we want, right? We have other obligations. Most of us just, the other obligation happens to be a job, right? So we have to go to work, we have to make a living, and we get to write around that time. So that becomes an issue. So we may have that goal of getting a book written, and then we sit down and we start going through our planner and our schedule, and we're like, okay, where is the time? And we that's where we back down and we say, well, forget it. I'm never going to get this done. I just don't have the time. So let's talk about that today, because what ends up happening is that writing ends up being pushed to the end. So after we're done with work, after we're done with kids, after we're done with chores, after we're done with everything else we have to do, we say, okay, we're going to write during this time, or, it just gets pushed to the end, which means that most of the time it just doesn't get done. So we don't want that to happen. And so let's talk about that. Let's talk about why you actually don't need as much time as you think you need. So what I want to do is I want to share just a little story with you. So back when my kids were young, and let's see, at this point I had written, I'm trying to remember if I had a book published yet. I did. So I had actually published my first novel right around the time my son was born. So what this means is that every single novel that I've published, I've published when I had my children. So during the busiest time, basically, of my life. So when my kids were young, I used to I needed to get things done. First of all, I had a contract with a publisher. So I had with the first novel that I published. I think it was a single one book contract, but right after that, I was offered a 3 book contract. So I had to write, 3 books, one right after the other, and so. It was, it was a challenge. It was a job, and I had to be able to find the time. So uh, and my son at the time, he was a very needy little kid. So he was afraid to go to sleep. So for the longest time, I would say, okay, as soon as he goes to sleep, I could write. But that was very difficult because he wouldn't go to sleep. So first he would climb into our bed. So it's like, okay, well, let's get him asleep and then I can climb out and go. Well, eventually you try to get them into their own bed and so into their own bedroom. And so we did that. But when I did that, it was, okay, well, Mom, stay with me until I fall asleep. It's like, okay, I'll stay with you. So sometimes I would lay on the bed next to him. Sometimes I would lay on the floor next to him. So, and each time I'm trying to get further and further away. So I would kind of get closer to the door and he'd sit up and say, Mom, are you still there? It's like, yeah, I'm still here. Just go to sleep. It's fine. Go to sleep. And I'd get closer and closer to the door. So it would be easier for me to leave when I needed to. And sometimes it would take him forever to fall asleep. Sometimes I'd fall asleep on the floor waiting for him to go to sleep. Then who wants to, at that point, come to the office and work, right? You're just exhausted and that's not, and it, you have no creativity, no energy left to do anything. So I totally get it if you're a mom and you have kids because it's really tough. And then, that stage thankfully does not last forever. It lasted quite a long time, but eventually he grew up, right? And then the kids got to bed at a reasonable time, and I was able to go into my office and start working. But you're still looking at, after 9 o'clock at night, 10 o'clock at night, and then that's when you do most of your writing, or that's when I was doing most of my writing. But it was definitely a challenge. It wasn't my best time. But then when they were older, there were other things. So it wasn't them, staying up all night, but I also homeschooled my kids. So I had to, I was busy during the day, of course, with all the learning activities or taking them places or doing things. And there wasn't, again, a lot of time. I was still kind of exhausted by the time I got to bed. And then I also, because I'd been a teacher for many years before that, and I wanted to keep my teaching credential active, I also subbed every once in a while. So every once in a while, I'd leave and I'd go and teach and then come back. So, there was that, of course. There was this part time job along with homeschooling my children, which again made it to like, when am I going to be able to actually sit down and write this chapter that I need to write? So when did that happen? Okay, so this is what I learned, and this is what I've carried through to today. Okay, so I learned this back during that time when life was just really chaotic, and I still needed and wanted to write, and had to because I had contracts, and wanted to because this is what I wanted my career to be. So what I learned is that I didn't need a million hours. I didn't even need a lot of consecutive hours. I just needed, first, I needed to be persistent, right? I needed to make sure that, even if I was tired, I had to do it. I had to write every single day. Okay. So even if I was tired, even if other things were going on, I had to be persistent and keep going and keep working on writing and getting better and better and better and creating better stories. The other thing I needed was very simple. I needed a pad of paper and a pen so that when I'm sitting in my son's room in a little light, waiting for him to fall asleep, and knowing that it was going to be very late by the time I got to my computer, is to sit there and take notes. And what is it? Where am I with my story? Where am I going with my story? What is some dialogue that I need to add? What are some scenes that need to get? What's happening? I needed all that stuff to write that down while I'm sitting there waiting for him to go to sleep, or when I'm waiting for them later on at games or taking them places or waiting for them to come out of a karate class or whatever, right? So I needed, in other words, to be flexible. I needed to be able to write wherever I was and whenever I decided I had 10 minutes to write. I couldn't wait for this magical, 2 to 3 hours or 4 hours and light my candles and have everything be perfection, because I knew there was going to be no perfection. I just needed to get it done whenever I could. The other thing I needed is to be able to pay attention to life around me. And we've talked about this before, right? So I needed to, if I was taking the kids on an excursion somewhere, we were going to an aquarium, or we were going to the beach to pick up shells, or we were going up to the mountains to go to the children's museum, or whatever we were doing, right? I needed those moments to be engraved in my brain. I needed to pay attention to what was going on, because at some point I could bring all these experiences into a book. Even if it was the experience of being a mom, or the experience of being frustrated, the experience of being tired. Uh, when will that come into a novel? Always, right? When is a character going to be very frustrated because they can't get a goal accomplished that they need to get accomplished? Almost in every novel. Is a character ever going to be tired? Well, what does that feel like exactly? How do you keep going when you're exhausted? Those kind of things are part of life, and they're part of what you want to bring into your character anyways, right? Or watching, it doesn't have to be negative things. It could be watching your child play and just be in complete, um, joy. My daughter used to have so much fun going to the beach, and she'd just be the happiest little kid, just sitting there digging in the sand and playing in the water. And it's like, okay, what does that look like, of watching somebody be so, just enjoying life so much, right? What does that look like? So you need to be a good person, good at absorbing some of the stuff from life, because this goes into your work in the future. So you want to have that. Okay. So that's another thing that I learned, is pay attention to what's going on. Yeah, you're tired, but don't forget to live and enjoy the things that you're doing, even if you're not sitting at your desk, because this is going to become useful someday. The other thing that I learned is that I need to show up for my dreams and my stories. So no matter how tired I was, I needed to be very focused, and I needed to just be there and do what I needed to do. I learned that it doesn't have to be perfect. Okay. My stories were not are not perfect. Uh, but they were good. They were good, right? They weren't perfect, but they were, I was going to say good enough, but that doesn't sound good. Like it's not that you want it to be just good enough. You want your stories to be good so that you are also being there for your readers, right? Your readers deserve to have the best story that you're capable of writing. But it doesn't, life doesn't have to be perfect for you to be able to do that. And I learned that, right? I learned that, I don't have to have the best energy, and I don't have to have the most wonderful environment in order to be able to create a good story. That if I really am focused on what I'm doing, if I'm really paying attention to my story, and I'm really just engaged in my characters and in the plot, then it will become a good story. At some point, you have to be able to sit with that whole novel that you wrote in pieces and make sure that it flows well and that it's not disjointed and that the characters aren't doing something really bizarre out of character 2/3 of the way into the story and have become different people without without a proper transformation. um, Obviously you do need that to be able to do that at some point and read the whole thing and make sure that it's a coherent story. But as you're writing it, as you're creating it, you are doing it in pieces, and it doesn't have you don't have to have that sort of undivided time to be able to write your scenes a little bit at a time. So is it frustrating? Is it frustrating that you don't have a huge block of time? Yes, of course it is. There are days even now with my kids growing up in college, but I'm doing other things now as well. I'm now teaching university level. I'm also teaching my own courses. I'm also doing other things that take up a lot of time. So is it frustrating not to have the ideal situation? Definitely. And do I hope someday I have undivided attention? Absolutely. But in the meantime, I just follow what has worked for me, and I'm sharing it because I'm thinking it might work for you, right? Is that you don't have to have a whole lot of time to be able to write a good book. You need the things that I mentioned, right? You need to show up. You need to be persistent. You need to not worry about being perfect. You need to be flexible. You need to pay attention to the world around you and enjoy the experiences that you're living, even if it's not in front of your computer typing. You need to take notes while you're out there. And lastly, you need to take advantage of every writing opportunity that you have. There were other moments within the day when my kids were doing things where I would pull out my laptop or pull out my notepad and take notes and write and or edit or do something. So anytime that I had some free time, I jumped in and did it. Okay, because that's the way that you get to the end, and you're able to type the end at the end of your story. I hope that this helps you, and I hope that it encourages you, because again, a lot of us just don't have that full time opportunity to write, but it doesn't mean that you can't get your story written. So I hope this has been helpful. Please hit the like button and the share button, and go enjoy getting some writing done this weekend. I'll see you again next week.